With that being said, we now welcome everyone to this panel discussion on the future of invoice-to-cash. And in this session, we have with us Sajeesh Kumar, Global Enterprise Service Line Head at Genpact, Sonali Nanda, she's the VP of Product at HighRadius, and this session will be moderated by Susie West. She is the founder and CEO of SharedServicesLink. A short introduction of everyone here. Sajeesh Kumar, he is the Global Enterprise Service Line Head for Genpact for almost 11 years, where he is responsible for designing and driving transformation initiatives across OTC processes for global organizations. Prior to that, he was leading the quote-to-cash process at HP and has 21 plus years of global experience in the order-to-cash function. Sonali Nanda is the Vice President of Product at HighRadius. She has been with HighRadius for the past 8 years and heads product management and product engineering for marquee cross-product and performs functional initiatives at HighRadius like autonomous, AI, ML, analytics, etc. And lastly but not least, Susie West. She is the CEO and founder of the B2B community SharedServicesLink and is considered an influencer, connector, and expert in finance shared services. With that being said, Susie, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
That's great, Julie. Thank you so much. And HighRadius, thanks so much for facilitating this great conversation today. So let's kick off. Sajeesh, Sonali, lovely to have you as my panelists. So let's kick off with talking a bit about the future of invoice-to-cash. Hopefully we are out of the worst of COVID-19, and 2020 itself was obviously, it presented a lot of uncertainty to all kinds of businesses, enterprise companies in particular, and right across the board. But we're kind of talking a bit more about enterprise organizations. I think we're all experiencing, or we would have experienced, how invoice to cash would have changed as a priority in the office of the CFO. Just a huge need and hunger to get that cash in as quickly as possible. And for GPOs, global process owners within order to cash, this meant an immediacy around needing to reconfigure processes, getting top of processes, standardizing and automating processes, and making sure that they were adapted so that they could kind of solve immediate issues, but also be future-proof should we come across something like this again. So question to both Sajeesh and Sonali is, with everything that happened in the last kind of 12, 14 months, and the impact that it had on order to cash, how do you think it's impacted the long-term vision for global process owners, and what do you see to be the future of order to cash? Over to you.
So thanks, Susie. Sonali, pleasure to be here talking to you about invoice to cash as always, and hoping all of our colleagues, family, friends across the Southeast Asia ravaging through the pandemic as we talk through are going to be having better days ahead. But to your questions, there are two questions to that, Susie. The first one is how has the uncertainty and the future-proofing of the role of invoice to cash worked? So let me address that first. I strongly believe that AR as a function has not just gained prominence within the CFO office alone, but across the industry, across the enterprise. Today, AR data is looked across the enterprise, not just within the CFO office alone. So that is something that is taken a turn for the good. I strongly believe that even though the AR function still falls under the responsibility sphere of the CFO office, the impact of this function goes way beyond the enterprise larger functions. It cuts across multiple functions, stakeholders, internally and even externally. Now, the biggest lesson from the past 18 months has been exactly that. So what has derived after that is functional silos are being broken. Digital transformation is truly accelerated, weeks now versus years, and truly end-to-end conversations are happening with common business objectives in mind. Data is key. Everybody wants to know how data is, coming through, what the data is actually telling us, and to a larger extent, how dynamic and flexible enterprises are on that space has proven to be the make or break of wading through a difficult and unplanned curve that this pandemic has been. Now, there's a second part of it, which is what is the future of invoice to cash? In my mind, I would put the future of invoice to cash into two phrases. One is being instinctive, and two is driving value outcomes. Now, the days of worrying about efficiency gains alone and a few millions as cash flow well within the mandates of the AR portfolio managed by the GBS leaders are long gone. The past 18 months has accelerated that acceptance that receivables management function can be so much more than just efficient transactional AR processes, right? Generating actionable business insights across the enterprise spectrum, leading to positive value outcomes such as cash, revenue, margin, experience. That is what the future of AR is heading towards. Now, AR analysts of the future will become more relationship and analysis oriented, and will be more the insight generators for most functions of an enterprise, really, is my view.
Great, thank you. How about you, Sonali?
Yeah, so thanks, Sushi, by the way, great question. I totally concur on a lot of points with what Sajeesh brought up. Now, talking from my experience of what I'm seeing, uncertainty which has happened because of the pandemic and other socioeconomic factors, I feel has just accelerated the increasing focus on cash flows, right? It was always there, but it has just become accelerated. Then people want real-time visibility into a global, centralized, you can call it as 360-degree AR health status, right? People are looking for solutions for cutting down on the growing headcount costs or optimizing those costs and making AR a much more strategic function and a customer-oriented function. Pretty much what Sajeesh was saying, that they wanted to be a customer relationship function. The focus is also shifted towards softwares now that can provide more end-to-end AR automation, right? Versus being just a centralized way of handling stuff. The focus has gone high on automation. And the other thing which we see is how can this AR softwares make accurate decisions through recommendations and predictions, right? One other additional criteria which I see in certain areas is enabling remote work, right? So that is to the first part of your question, which you are saying, what is the impact you are seeing? Now coming to what would be the future of invoice to cash, I strongly believe that future of invoice to cash seems to be more like an autonomous environment, autonomous, fully integrated invoice to cash software that provides not only end-to-end automation, but also makes smarter decisions and recommendations for the AR analysts, right? Giving an example here, predicting which customers to prioritize as an example based on predicted delinquencies or identifying hard to find invalid deductions, right, for faster recovery are some examples, right? Similarly, thinking about autonomous systems providing 360-degree view of the customer data or providing tips to the collectors on what to talk on the calls, capturing notes and taking collection actions on behalf of the collector, thus enabling the analyst to focus on more strategic functions would be how the future will look like, right? Again, I concur with Sajeesh on the point of data. Future is going to capitalize on data and providing a deep visibility into the metrics and insights with benchmarking for a manager or a head of the organization to focus on which are the right areas, right? Whether it is analyst performance, which is an issue, or is it process inefficiencies, which are an issue, or is it customer performance, which is an issue. So that's the kind of visibility which people could look forward to when it comes to measurement. One last thing which I wanted to add there is technology-wise, I see self-learning AI is something which is going to replace normal RPA bots for sure, right? So, yeah, over to you, Sushi.
Well, so Sonali, that's all great. And you touched on metrics a little bit just there. So let's just build on that with our next question. Kind of in your experience, and again, like looking forward, so now and maybe metrics for the future, can you help us understand a little bit about the kind of metrics that order-to-cash leaders should be looking to in order to measure the success of their invoice-to-cash process? Sure.
So metrics is one of my favorite topics. So let me give a little bit of details here, right? So I strongly feel that O2C leaders should look at invoice-to-cash process in two different dimensions when it comes to measurement. One is efficiency and the other is effectiveness, right? Mm-hmm. And let me explain that bit a little bit. Efficiency is the cost of receivables processing, right? So think about what is the percentage of receivables collected without any human touch, right? That's like full automation. You didn't even need a collector to touch it, or with some minimal intervention. or something like what is the percentage of auto-applied cash, right? So those are indicators of efficiency gains. And this is primarily driven by automation. And while these kind of metrics are lagging indicators, there can be a lot of leading indicators like, okay, in the Cash App world, what is my remittance auto capture rate? Or, in the software will obviously tell you some leading indicators towards the final automation as an example. Now, when it comes to effectiveness, it is about the impact which is created because of the AR function, right? So, for example, what is the percentage of non-bad debts, right? And this is an outcome of non-aging invoices and recovery from invalid deductions or disputes or chargebacks, right? Now, a lot of time, companies or operation leaders focus more on efficiency and cost optimization or on effectiveness, but not necessarily both. Right. So what I strongly believe here is the two metrics coming together, efficiency and effectiveness, would be key for measuring the success of the future transformation projects. And let me give you a small example here. So let's say your collections might be a lot more automated, thus leading fewer collectors. But is that actually resulting in, controlling your receivables aging, as an example? And this is exactly where technology has a big role to play in the traditional BPM, BPO paradigm which we were living in. And that's where, Sushi, it's interesting here to call out that we are excited to partner with the likes of Genpact, as an example, right? To bring in that fusion of technology and processes, but more metrics driven or outcome driven, right? So that's how I would like to call it out. So think about, in 2 words, fusion of efficiency and effectiveness, and measuring it with proper benchmarks, which is coming from the industry, is the best way to measure the success of any transformation project.
Great, some really great tips there for metrics and KPIs. So you're excited, Sonali, and I'm sure the rest of HighRadius is about the strategic relationship with Genpact, and I understand that they're very excited about it as well. So question to you, Sajeesh. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on the partnership with HighRadius, the why behind it, why are you partnering with them, obviously specifically on the invoice-to-cash process, and why you see it as a strategic move. And also, if you could just talk a little bit about what this combination, this partnership means for the future of global business services and shared services.
Happy to, Susie. But before I jump into the context and talk about the partnership itself, let me tell you that at Genpact, before we went down the partnership route, we strongly believe that the future of finance to be extensively influenced by ideal combination of digital and domain. And you would be surprised to know that the whole Genpact and HighRadius partnership by itself was facilitated by our common clients who actually understood the same. So the coming together of leaders in AR software as a service in the AR domain space was, in my mind, inevitable and destined, right? Always very exceptionally pleasure to be talking about that and having seen that successful in itself. But over and above the platform offerings across the AR function and the process IP that Genpact has brought to the table, Sonali was talking about that. The common interest for both the enterprises was primarily the maniacal crime centricity and the intent to drive value outcomes for our clients as primary objectives. In my honest opinion, HighRadius was one of the SaaS companies that was eager to talk beyond licensing revenue and also talk about business outcomes. That itself was a huge help. Now, Genpact has the scale and the experience to deliver end-to-end transformation for AR. And HighRadius, as our strategic choice as the technology provider for order to cash, it's a win-win-win across our customers, HighRadius and Genpact. But above all of this, Susie, what is exciting is the coming together of minds from both the organizations to develop new IP. We are really defining how AR should be tracked and measured in the future. So we've been questioning the traditional norms of AR, designing the ideal mix of digital and domain across industries and markets, and pushing the boundaries that make sense in a new normal environment. One of the outcomes of that is the STAR framework and the pi-square index approach, which is quite a unique and innovative way of redefining the value from an AR function that ideally balances efficiency and effectiveness. In fact, we are so confident of this framework in this instance that the whole commercial framework of STAR is less traditional SaaS license fee model and more on committed business outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Great. Sounds fascinating. I think everyone that's attending today would like to know a little bit more about STAR. Could you elaborate on that?
Happy to, Susie. So for years and even now in pockets, the biggest challenge that most enterprises have had is to spend millions of dollars on tech interventions with no assurance of whether the tech would work at all, and with zero business context associated with that purchasing decision. So businesses then have to live with it and make do with what was handed to them. You then had to invest in an army of either data scientists or domain experts, which is all very contradictory to the whole initial intent of making things easy and smarter. You'll basically end up with a major science experiment. But that's not the core business. It's a distraction. So our objective was to solve for that specific challenge. We intended to deliver an ideal AR function for our clients that balances efficiency and effectiveness in equal measure without diluting the value of each. Of course, having business insights and value outcomes is the primary compass to the North Star we wanted to achieve. STAR stands for straight through AR, and that is a result of our common research that helps enterprise wade through this maze of digital transformation with AR. And it happens with zero to minimal effort at their end, zero disruption to business as usual. And then they also enjoy the fruits of a committed business outcomes. How we went about this was through the marriage of Genpact IP and the HighRadius AI offerings clubbed in one software instance. Now, Genpact had deep expertise in how industries operate, how consumer goods companies operate, life sciences operate, heavy manufacturing companies operate. We know how their customer segments behave and why they behave in that manner. We know what works and what does not work. We know how connected AP/AR ecosystems work. I mean, the retail companies work vis-a-vis the manufacturing company, how the distributors work versus the wholesalers. All of this comes into play. And you have best practices of over 2.5 decades of running AR businesses for leading companies. You have frameworks in place. You have policies, analytics use cases, business insights. And HighRadius has perfected the art of use cases in AI on specific business functions across AR. So when we jointly brought this together, an assurance of delivery of a straight-through AR function, it's backed up by extensive domain and digital depth, and it is very real. The STAR instance for now is live on HighRadius. It's an amalgamation of Genpact's process and frameworks, which is embedded into the HighRadius digital SaaS platform. So see, this was our vision of an ideal invoice-to-cash function of the future that is scalable, instinctive, and more value generating. Now, the journey did not end there. You would see that I spoke about STAR, or you would ask what is PI. What we also realized as we went through that thought process was that there is no one metric that definitively tracks the ideal balance of efficiency and effectiveness of an AR function. You needed a plethora of AR metrics to assess if you're successful in the journey at all. So we innovated that too. We developed an index called the Perfect Invoice Index. And then we added on the pi square, the E stands for square, which is efficiency and effectiveness. In my mind, I constantly call it this the one AR metric to replace all AR metrics. Now, this is an index that picks the ideal weightage relevant to an industry or a market with the specific nuances considered from them across 3 key efficiency metrics and 3 effectiveness metrics that by in itself covers all of the AR function. Think of it this way. We wanted our GBS leaders and AR leaders to go to their CFO tomorrow, project this one metric on a page to show their CFO exactly how AR function is performing. In summary, if the AR function was the vehicle that you were driving and specific value outcomes were your destination, STAR will be your engine and PI is your Google map.
Great. Thank you. Okay, that kind of transitions us on to kind of closing thoughts. Kind of looking at the last 18 months or so and looking forward, what would be your recommendation to leaders in order to cash and GBS leaders generally about what their kind of North Star might look like in the coming months and years?
Sure. I would suggest a 4-point approach. I would suggest align on the company and business objectives upfront. What is key? Is it customer experience? Is it cash? Is it cost? Is it compliance? Or is it all of the above? If it is all of the above, what are the trade-offs possible? What takes precedence? I think it's important to have that honest, objective conversation, because you cannot chase after multiple directions at this very agile requirement component. The second thing that I'll say is link that business objective to the process, policy, platform, and people strategy. This is, I call it the PPP kit. What we say is that, every single process decision, every single policy decision, platform decision, and people strategy should be assigned to what matters to the business objectives. Experience cuts across all of them. So that's the second part. The third angle I'll put across is then you can design the ideal mix of domain and digital that makes sense for your industry, region, and business units. This cannot be replicated from one enterprise to another beyond a point. And that effort needs to be made. You just cannot plug in something and think that it will solve world hunger. Design is key. The fourth one that I'll put across is track value outcomes as key metric. What gets tracked gets improved. If you're tracking accuracy and TAT still, well, you might be doing great in that, but you're not going to deliver value beyond that component. So it's necessary to do that. But above all of these, remain agile. I think it's important to think beyond the mandates of the AR portfolio that is managed or the AR specific metrics alone. Sharing data, insights, information extensively with upstream functions, those things matter.
Great. How about you, Sonali?
Yeah, so from my side, I would say the number one thing which you should do is focus on the business results or the outcomes in the long term. But at the same time, I think you should have a solid pulse for the leading indicators in the short term, right? And why that is important, because a lot of times some of these indicators we talk about takes time to start getting reflected in your outcomes. So my strong recommendation would be not to wait for 2 years or 3 years to find out if your project or digital transformation journey is successful or not. Break it down into a science, come up with those leading indicators and start tracking and getting a 360-degree view upfront, right? And we have done that with some of our clients, and we have seen a lot of proven results there. And this is where I completely agree with Sajeesh, and I was very keenly listening to Sajeesh because of the star offering which he talked about, and that definitely brings in a lot of credibility here. Now coming to the long-term, short-term indicators, couple of things you can use from a software perspective is do watch out for .1 performance from HighRadius as well. Definitely something which you should look out as it aims at making your teams a .1 team, right? When it comes to automation, in general, I would highly recommend to look beyond the normal RPA software. So make the right software choice is very important. And take the full advantage of the autonomous and AI use cases that is going to put your analysts in an autopilot mode, because those are the use cases which are finally going to drive efficiency and effectiveness, right? And in turn, even affect the pi square, which Sajeesh was talking about. So that would be my suggestion or recommendation.
Thank you, Sonali. Great. Just before we move to Q&A from the floor, please, we've got lots of participants on this session. Please go ahead and put your questions to Sajeesh and Sonali just by writing them into the box available. Just before we do that, we're going to run a poll question. So we'll just have this ticking over in the background. Would you like to know more about AI-powered automation solutions from HighRadius? Yes, please connect me to an expert. Yes, send me some material for my research, or maybe no, not right now. So while you're doing that, let's go ahead and put the first question to our panelists. I'll start with you, Sonali, and maybe Sajeesh, you'd like to come in on this one. So Sonali, you were really talking about some metrics there, and some great metrics, really useful for the listeners to be taking away. Could you elaborate or make a suggestion around kind of customer experience metrics, and also talk about how technology can enable better customer experience, how these platforms like HighRadius can actually practically deliver a better customer experience? Maybe you can give some examples.
Sure. I think good question, and I did touch base that probably, but didn't go very deep into it. So think about it. Anywhere where the software is delivering effectiveness, okay, it has a direct correlation to customer experience. So let's put it that way, right? So anywhere where the where the software or the process is delivering effectiveness. So in the sense, you are not following up with the customer if they are going to pay you, right? Or you know that the customer will pay you, and hence you are not going and pestering the customer. That's the starting point of a customer experience, right? Now, how does software enable that? Now, let me use a very simple example of AI use case. So let's say a collection AI use case is predicting for you when an invoice will get paid, right? And that information in itself is trying to help you prioritize your customer work list and guide you whether to touch base with the customer or not. Now, if the payment is going to come on a certain date and system is predicting that for you, you really don't need to follow up with the customer, right? Another example I can give there is, let's say you're calling up the customer and you want to know about some of the small talk which you had with the customer before, like, knowing about when was their birthday, or knowing about even simple things like where are they located, in which portion of the world they're located, when should you call them, what is the best time for you to call them. If those kind of recommendations start coming from a software, you start building that, taking that customer experience to the next level. So that's the kind of you can say an impact which AI and autonomous can create. And of course, any metric which is, when it comes to metrics, any metric which is creating high effectiveness will definitely have a high correlation with customer experience.
Great.
Sajeesh, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, so and just teeing off on what you shared, Sonali, for me, customer experience is a business outcome. And I was talking extensively about business. I wouldn't deviate that separately at all. It is a business outcome. We live in a world of people-to-people engagements. And if, both user experience as well as customer experience is not positively influenced, everything else does have a leakage point. You gave a few examples of how it matters when a collector is having a conversations that is more empathy driven and emotional and more connected rather than just talking numbers. It helps, and that might be a good thing as well. But over and beyond that, it is also about simple factors that you actually enable through the design of your software and your process, that tomorrow, for example, you do not call up ever a customer who's actually made a payment, but it is just not applied in your cash, and therefore you have had to actually call them. You don't want that kind of a situation. That is a huge dent on customer experience by any means. And those are things that can be fundamentally solved through a proper design and proper connect in terms of how your process works. So absolutely, customer experience is a key component, and technology can drive. Technology and domain both should drive. It should not be a one thing or the other, is my view. Great.
This question is kind of building on it, but it's really zeroing in on AI to a kind of a deeper extent. So customer experience is something all GBS leaders are focusing on, and I think you're right in just wrapping it up in business outcome there, Sajeesh, as far as kind of phraseology is concerned. And given customers are more informed, they're expecting a faster resolution these days. They're expecting the GBS generally to be more dynamic and nimble. How do you think AI and Frida and another wider HighRadius technology, another technology, AI technology out there as well, how do you think it's helping within this area?
Sure. So, Sushi, when it comes to AI, now let me give a couple more examples. I think that's the best way to look at it and go deeper. So think if the customer is looking for a faster resolution, which means what? If they have disputed an invoice, they want to know, okay, what's the stand of my supplier on this, right? What's the stand? Are you approving? Are you not approving? As an example. Now, a lot of times people take time to work on a certain dispute or a deduction because there is a huge backlog piled up. Now, think about an AI system which is able to predict and identify the potential invalids and also automatically clear the potential valids. So in the deduction world, then if you think from a customer perspective, they are going to get a faster response with respect to which of those disputes are approved or which are denied, as an example, right? So that is a very good example of how this correlates to faster resolution. The other aspects of making customers happy is something which I touch based on while responding to the previous question, where think about a world where whether it's a Frida or autonomous or AI is actually providing insights about using the 360-degree data on what should you talk to the customer, giving the information handy to the collector so that they are not asking the same questions again and again. Similarly, if I think about, if you think a little bit on the credit world, let's say, right, the customers often get into blocked order state, right? But think about a world where the AI system is able to predict that a certain customer is going to get into a blocked order state and enables the credit analyst or the collector to follow up with the customer and ensure that they get the payment before time, so that the customer is not waiting in the queue to get their orders released, as an example. Again, that's an example of faster resolution, faster communication, and making sure that the customer and the analysts, the AI analysts, have a great relationship.
Okay. Most of the customer issues that this particular viewer is experiencing, and it no doubt relates to many others on the line, are around billing. So what would be the HighRadius platform solution or module to specifically address billing and master data issues?
Okay. All right. So when it comes to master data issues, so I think let me take it in two parts. One is the data which is stored in the ERP, right? We cannot do a lot about it because ultimately you have to mention, store your customer master, you have to store your material master in the ERP, and that is used across all modules. But having said that, in the HighRadius module, across all the products, you have the flexibility to fix the master data issues. Right? If your ERP is not the source of truth, and let's say you have an Excel sheet or there is some other software which is the source of truth, those can be brought in, and the administrative access is given to the administrators of the of the specific AR group to maintain those master data records in the system. And this is not specifically a software. This is a functionality available in all the products of HighRadius. So, for example, if a collection looks at customer master, then you can maintain customer master. If a cash app is looking at, let's say, some amount of customer relationship, like the oil payer, you can go ahead and maintain that too, right? If a deduction is looking at material master, that when you subscribe to deductions, as an example. So that is the master data. So, what was the other question? Sorry if I missed it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so master data you've talked about extensively. Billing.
Yeah, so billing is very, it's not a separate module. I believe when you're talking about billing, you're talking about the overall billing of the software. Again, it's into it. But if you're talking about invoice billing and delivering invoices to the customers, then electronic invoice presentment and payment is the product from HighRadius which solves that problem.
Okay, good. So moving on to the next question. Again, viewers, if you have more questions, please send them through. We've got a couple more minutes before we close this session. Do we foresee asynchronous, I cannot say that word, communication platforms powered by AI? Are they planning on, or do you see them integrating with core software to deliver customer experience? And is this recommended for all? Or is this recommended at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is an interesting insight, which we have been also thinking for a while in our product labs, that does it even make sense for the customers and analysts to, asynchronously communicate? Honestly, I would say the focus, at least right now, should be to fix the processes as well as the metrics and drive customer relationship through that. But I would not be surprised to see if asynchronous communication ever comes to the software world. So yeah, maybe it's a very, very futuristic roadmap item, but I'm not expecting that, you have to do it immediately. Right?
Mm-hmm. How about you, Sajeesh? Anything to add to that?
No, I have a subject matter expert lens rather than a tech lens to that question. My question would be, Can you do something like that on a SaaS platform? I'm sure the minds like Sonali and all can make that happen, right, with her team. My question is, how does it help me in my value outcomes? Does it actually move the needle in terms of delivering value to the customer? If it is a yes, then it's a no-brainer. If it is a no, then why are we doing this? Just because we have a function, you don't need to tick that light on. It's like switching on a light during a daytime, right? You can, but do you need to, is the question you need to ask. On the previous question, though, we were talking about master data and billing, and that's reality. Absolutely fair question to ask. But today, the AR leaders and the GBS leaders, when they share information saying, I have a master data problem causing trouble with my past dues, it's a very generic statement that they make. What if tomorrow you can back that up with data, with insights of saying these many invoices caused due to master data issues at our end, caused due to billing errors, and this is what is actually costing you the CFO's office. Do you want to do something about it? Gives a much more deeper conversation and insights to resolve that interim problem. So AR, like I mentioned, it's not just about solving all the problems at our end alone, but also sharing information that can help other stakeholders and functions solve their problems too.
Moving on, thank you, Sajeesh. So for the success of digital transformation projects, obviously measuring the ROI is important. We also talked about the other factors that are important there, the business impact and business outcomes. Could you just summarize, maybe both of you, how HighRadius and Genpact are making this happen?
Do you want to go first, Sonali? I'm trying to understand the question. Sorry, Susie, if you could repeat it once more.
Oh, yes, happily. Okay. So I think it boils down to just summarizing the relationship between HighRadius and Genpact.
Yeah.
How is the partnership between the two organizations really helping success of digital transformation projects across companies?
Perfect.
How would you summarize that?
So, Susie, there used to be times when a software provider would go in and take a product off the shelf and provide them across and say, okay, you're subject matter experts, figure it out and deploy it, right? There would be times when we as subject matter experts would go in and say, here are all my plethora of best practices and insights and all of that. And the software provider would look at it and say, I'm not changing all of these from my off-the-shelf product. Right? It just doesn't make sense. Why are you asking me to change all of this? That's not what I wanted to say. That is what exactly was going across for businesses, and it is not helping businesses at all by any means, where you have to handle the software that you have purchased, and then you have to handle the domain and the business expertise that is coming in, and both were not talking to each other. These days, when we see Genpact and HighRadius go hand in hand, we're talking the same language. The Genpact is coming across and saying across for this industry, for this particular customer segment, hey, I believe this particular collection strategy is what needs to be defined and designed. And then our HighRadius colleagues actually say, perfect, tell me where you should do it, how dynamic it should be, and let's develop that and put across. That 14-week period of where the design phase happens, and 14 is the extended period, it can happen anywhere between 10 to 14 weeks, where you're actually developing that together, sets a very strong foundation, both from a business standpoint as well as a software standpoint, to deliver the value that the business is looking for. And they don't have the headache of trying to explain one thing or the other and trying to be the bridge between those two components, right? And that is the biggest value that I've seen. And then once you have that designed right, when the value starts flowing in, it is a pleasure to watch.
Thank you. Sonali.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Okay. Yeah, so I think Sajeesh did summarize it to the perfect extent, but I'll just put it this way, that if you think about Genpact and HighRadius, you need to think about just two things. One is straight through account receivables, and that is happening through your process optimization and automation, right? As long as you're thinking in these lines, I think that's the value prop which the STAR solution brings to the table, or the partnership between Genpact and HighRadius brings to the table. The impact, the perfect invoice effectiveness and efficiency score, obviously that's going to go up because you're touching both the efficiency metrics as well as the effectiveness metrics, which is the fusion of the best of the both worlds, right? So that's the impact which the partnership of Genpact and HighRadius is going to bring to the table.
Great. Sonali Nanda and Sajeesh Kumar, thank you so much. I'm Susie West. It's been a pleasure. And now I'd like to hand back to Julie. Back to you, please, Julie.